2 weeks ago, I read to you guys the story of Moses and Pharaoh. How Moses led the charge to take his people out, right? God's people, that is. Last week, Reverend Wilson read you guys the story of what happened after he took them out. Now, I am going to read you the story of what happens as we are living as God's people. What are the rules to living as God's people? Let's check it out. Moses and God's rules. God had rescued his people from Egypt. Now, they were out in the desert with no place of their own. They needed a new home. But God had already thought of that. Remember God's promise to Abraham? God had promised him an enormous family and a beautiful place for that family to live. I will give you everything you need, God told his people. All God's people had to do was follow him from where they were, the hot, dry, dusty desert, to where he wanted them to be, somewhere wonderful, full of good things. So off they set, walking through the desert. But as soon as they started to get hot and dirty and thirsty, which wasn't long at all, they started to grumble. God's people were good at forgetting. Sometimes they forgot all the good things God had done. Sometimes they forgot what he had promised. They forgot to trust him. So they grumbled about being hot and complained about being tired. They thought God wasn't looking after them at all, but he was. In the middle of the desert, God took them to a special place with wonderful springs of fresh water to drink and cool, shady trees to sit under. He was showing them how much he cared about them. Soon, God's people were grumbling again. Life in the desert is too hard, they complained. What will we do when we have no more food? But God was looking after them. One morning, they woke up and found something called manna all over the ground. Moses told them that it was for making bread. Every morning, they gathered just enough for the day. So God's people kept traveling, and every day, God made sure they had what they needed. One day, God brought Moses and his people to a place called Mount Sinai. At the bottom of the mountain, they set up their camp, but this wasn't the land God had promised. Why had they stopped? Something important was going to happen here. God had good things in store for his family, and this was where he was going to tell them about it. God told Moses to climb to the top of Mount Sinai. God was going to tell Moses how he wanted his people to live now that they were free. So Moses climbed to the very top of the mountain, and there, surrounded by a thick cloud, God spoke to him. His voice was loud like thunder. I am your God who rescued you from Egypt. Never forget that. I am loving, faithful, and forgiving. If you obey my rules, I will do amazing things. Other tribes will see all that I do for you and will know who I am. God told Moses, you will be my treasured people. God gave Moses 10 special rules. He wrote them on stone tablets, and Moses brought them back down the mountain. God's 10 special rules weren't the only instructions he gave to his people. There were lots more. He wanted to teach them how to love him and love each other. He wanted them to be a different kind of tribe, just as he told Abraham. There were rules to teach them how to take care of neighbors from other tribes who were poor and needy. There were rules to teach them to take care of neighbors in their own tribe. And there were rules to help them remember what God had done for them so they would keep trusting in him and stay close to him. But the most important rule was this: to love God with all their hearts and to love their neighbors too. The most important part is to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbors too. We're here to love each other. We should never carry hate in our heart. And remember, just because things get hard or you get tired doesn't mean God doesn't hear you, doesn't mean he's not around. We just can never forget that we should trust God and continue to love him. See you next time.